USS Scorpion and the silence that followed. On May 21, 1968, the United States Navy declared USS Scorpion lost at sea. There was no distress call, no explosion reported, no final message from the crew. 129 men vanished beneath the Atlantic Ocean without warning, without witnesses, and without answers. In a Cold War defined by secrecy and silence, Scorpion became one of its most enduring mysteries, a nuclear submarine that disappeared during peacetime, leaving behind questions that still refuse to settle. USS Scorpion was a skipjack-class nuclear attack submarine, fast, sleek, and designed for one purpose: hunting enemy submarines. She was commissioned in 1960 and spent most of her career operating in the Atlantic and Mediterranean, shadowing Soviet naval movements and gathering intelligence. Her missions were rarely discussed, even among families. Like all submarines of the Silent Service, Scorpion existed in the margins of public awareness, present, powerful, and deliberately unseen. The men aboard Scorpion were not faceless sailors. They were fathers, sons, husbands, and brothers. Many were young, barely in their 20s. Others were seasoned submariners who had spent years beneath the sea. They lived with constant risk, fully aware that their profession offered little margin for error. Yet morale aboard Scorpion was reportedly strong. Despite mechanical concerns and deferred maintenance, the crew trusted their training and their ship. By early 1968, the Cold War was entering one of its most volatile phases. The Vietnam War raged openly, while beneath the oceans the United States and the Soviet Union conducted an invisible arms race. Nuclear submarines stalked one another across the Atlantic, testing sonar systems, tracking patrol routes, and rehearsing scenarios that everyone hoped would never become real. In this climate of tension, even routine patrols carried strategic weight. USS Scorpion departed Norfolk, Virginia, in February 1968 for what was expected to be a standard deployment. She traveled to the Mediterranean as part of 6th Fleet operations, conducting surveillance and exercises. During this period, reports indicated that Scorpion suffered from mechanical issues, some serious enough to raise concerns among naval inspectors. A full overhaul had been recommended, but postponed. The submarine was cleared to operate, but not without unease. As Scorpion prepared to return home in May, she was given additional tasks. Intelligence suggested increased Soviet submarine activity near the Azores. Scorpion was ordered to observe and possibly track these movements. This was not unusual. Shadowing Soviet submarines was a core mission of U.S. attack boats. What made this assignment different was timing. The submarine was nearing the end of a long deployment, and fatigue, both mechanical and human, was inevitable. On May 20th, 1968, Scorpion sent her final message to naval authorities. It was routine, unremarkable, and calm. She reported her position and course toward Norfolk. Nothing in the transmission suggested distress. Nothing hinted at danger. After that message, Scorpion vanished. When she failed to arrive on schedule, concern turned to alarm. Search efforts began quietly at first, then expanded dramatically. The Navy mobilized one of the largest underwater search operations in history. Aircraft, surface ships, and other submarines combed thousands of square miles of ocean. Classified acoustic monitoring systems, part of the Secret Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS, were reviewed for anomalies. Somewhere in the Atlantic, at a depth of nearly 2 miles, the truth waited in silence. Months later, the wreckage was found. USS Scorpion lay shattered on the ocean floor, broken into sections. The damage was catastrophic. The submarine had imploded, crushed by immense pressure. The reactor had shut down safely, but the hull had failed completely. The images raised more questions than they answered. What could destroy a nuclear submarine so suddenly, so completely, without warning? The Navy's initial explanation pointed toward a mechanical failure, possibly a malfunctioning torpedo detonating inside the submarine. This theory suggested an internal explosion triggered a rapid descent and hull collapse. It was plausible, but not definitive. Evidence was incomplete, and much of it remained classified. families were told little. The public was told less. Almost immediately, alternative theories emerged. Some speculated that Scorpion had been engaged by a Soviet submarine, either accidentally or deliberately. Others suggested a collision or even sabotage. During the Cold War, such ideas were not dismissed lightly. Beneath the sea, confrontations occurred without witnesses, and political necessity often demanded silence rather than truth. The crew's families were left in limbo. There were no remains to bury, no final answers to hold on to. Memorial services were held, flags folded, names engraved, but uncertainty lingered. Many relatives believed the full story had not been told. Some still do. For them, the loss of Scorpion was not just a tragedy. It was an unanswered question that shaped the rest of their lives. As years passed, documents were declassified in fragments. Investigations were revisited. New analyses challenged old conclusions. Yet no explanation gained universal acceptance. Each theory carried gaps, assumptions, and unanswered details. The deeper analysts looked, the clearer it became that the truth might never be fully recovered from the ocean floor. USS Scorpion did not disappear in battle. She vanished in silence during a time when the world was technically at peace, but perpetually on edge. Her loss exposed the hidden risks of Cold War deterrence and the human cost of secrecy. Before answers, before blame, before theories, there were 129 men who never came home. And their story begins not with certainty, but with silence. What might have happened to USS Scorpion? When USS Scorpion was confirmed lost, the U.S. Navy faced a dilemma that went far beyond explaining a single disaster. This was the Cold War, and submarines were among the most closely guarded instruments of national power. Any explanation for Scorpion's loss would inevitably reveal something about American capabilities or vulnerabilities. From the beginning, the investigation unfolded behind layers of classification, shaping not only what the public learned, but what could be openly acknowledged at all. The first serious explanation to emerge was the Mark 37 torpedo theory. Scorpion carried these electrically powered torpedoes, some of which were known to have battery reliability issues. Investigators proposed that one torpedo may have activated unintentionally, overheated, and detonated within or near the torpedo room. Such an explosion could have disabled the submarine instantly, causing a rapid descent beyond crush depth. The theory aligned with known technical concerns, but lacked definitive proof. Supporting this hypothesis were acoustic signals recorded by the Navy's secret SOSA system. Analysts identified a sequence of sounds consistent with an explosion, followed by structural collapse. However, SOSA's data was incomplete and filtered through interpretation. The ocean is a noisy place, and distinguishing between implosion, explosion, and environmental noise is far from straightforward. Even experts disagreed on what the recordings truly indicated. Another theory focused not on weapons, but on mechanical failure. USS Scorpion had a documented history of maintenance issues. Her last overhaul had been deferred due to budget constraints and operational demands. Concerns had been raised about hull integrity, emergency systems, and propulsion reliability. Critics argued that the submarine was sent to sea in a compromised condition, pushed beyond safe limits by Cold War urgency. This possibility raised uncomfortable questions. If Scorpion was lost due to preventable mechanical failure, then responsibility did not lie with fate or the enemy, but with institutional decisions. During the Cold War, pressure to maintain constant submarine presence was immense. Gaps in patrol coverage were seen as strategic risks. In that environment, safety margins could erode quietly, unnoticed until disaster struck. The most controversial explanation, and the one the Navy consistently denied, was enemy action. Some analysts suggested that Scorpion may have been engaged by a Soviet submarine, possibly during a tracking operation. In 1968, Soviet and American submarines operated in dangerously close proximity. Collisions and near misses were more common than officially admitted. A misinterpreted maneuver or accidental torpedo launch could have escalated instantly, and been buried diplomatically just as quickly. Fueling this theory were reports that Soviet naval activity increased sharply in the Atlantic around the time of Scorpion's disappearance. Soviet ships reportedly converged on an area near the Azores shortly after Scorpion was lost, before the U.S. publicly acknowledged the incident. To some, this suggested prior knowledge. To others, it was coincidence amplified by suspicion. In the Cold War, coincidence rarely felt convincing. The Navy rejected the enemy action theory firmly and repeatedly. Acknowledging hostile engagement during peacetime would have had profound consequences. It could have forced public confrontation, escalated tensions, or undermined confidence in deterrent stability. Even if evidence existed, revealing it may have been deemed more dangerous than silence. This possibility has haunted discussions of Scorpion for decades. Independent researchers and former submariners began reanalyzing the evidence in the years that followed. Some challenged the torpedo theory, arguing that damage patterns on the wreck did not conclusively match an internal explosion. Others questioned whether the acoustic data had been selectively interpreted. Without full access to classified materials, these debates remained unresolved, yet persistent. In the 1990s, renewed interest in Scorpion led to further Navy reviews. Advanced analysis reaffirmed the original conclusion. A torpedo malfunction was the most likely cause. Still, the language remained cautious. Most probable, not certain. The ocean floor had preserved the wreck, but not clarity. Each new study closed some questions while reopening others. What made Scorpion different from other submarine losses was not just ambiguity, but timing. In 1968 alone, multiple submarines from different nations were lost, including the Soviet K-129. The oceans were crowded with nuclear vessels, all operating in secrecy. The margin between routine patrol and catastrophe was thin. Scorpion was not an anomaly, it was a warning. For the families, official explanations brought little comfort. Technical probabilities did not replace certainty. Many believed that the full truth was still hidden behind classification barriers. Some pursued independent investigations, others lobbied for document releases. Their grief evolved into resolve. The loss of Scorpion became not only a naval mystery, but a personal crusade for answers. The deeper analysts looked, the more the case reflected the Cold War itself. Fragmented information, competing narratives, and truth constrained by strategic necessity. Even honest investigators were limited by what they could know and what they could say. Scorpion existed at the intersection of technology, secrecy, and geopolitics, where definitive answers are rare. By the end of the 20th century, USS Scorpion had become more than a lost submarine. She was a symbol of the unseen risks carried by those who served beneath the waves. Whether destroyed by malfunction, miscalculation, or silent confrontation, her fate illustrated a stark reality of the Cold War. Some battles were never acknowledged, and some losses were never fully explained. Why USS Scorpion still haunts the Cold War. More than half a century after USS Scorpion vanished, the submarine remains on the ocean floor, undisturbed and unreachable by conventional means. The Navy declared the wreck a war grave, closing it to exploration or salvage. This decision was practical and symbolic. The sea had claimed the vessel and her crew, and the Navy chose to let them rest where they fell. Yet for many, this closure felt incomplete. The absence of certainty weighed heavier than the finality of death. In the years following the disaster, the U.S. Navy quietly implemented changes in submarine safety and maintenance protocols. Torpedo handling procedures were revised. Oversight of deferred maintenance tightened. Nuclear propulsion standards became even more rigorous. Officially, these changes were part of routine evolution. Unofficially, many believed they were lessons learned from Scorpion, lessons paid for with lives. The families of the crew became stewards of memory. Without wreckage to visit or remains to bury, remembrance took on new forms. Memorials were erected. Names were read aloud at ceremonies. Stories were passed down through generations. For spouses and children, The loss of Scorpion was not frozen in 1968. It unfolded across decades, shaped by unanswered questions and quiet endurance. Declassification efforts offered partial illumination, but no final resolution. Documents were released in fragments, redacted and incomplete. Technical reports hinted at internal debates within the Navy that had never reached the public. Each new disclosure seemed to confirm how much remained unknown. Transparency, it turned out, had limits, even long after the Cold War ended. For historians, Scorpion became a case study in institutional secrecy. It illustrated how organizations under strategic pressure manage failure, not only through investigation, but through narrative control. This did not necessarily imply deception. In a world where information itself could destabilize global balance, restraint was often policy. The truth, however, rarely fits neatly into policy. The crew of USS Scorpion were professionals operating at the edge of human and technological capability. They accepted risks most civilians never see. Their service was invisible by design. When disaster struck, that invisibility extended to their story. The men were mourned, but the full context of their loss remained classified, debated, and unresolved. In the post-Cold War era, interest in submarine mysteries grew. Advances in technology made deep-sea exploration more conceivable. Still, the Navy maintained its position. The wreck of Scorpion would not be disturbed. The past would remain sealed beneath nearly 2 miles of water. For some, this was respect. For others, it was silence enforced by authority. USS Scorpion also reshaped public perception of nuclear submarines. Once symbols of technological triumph, they were now understood as fragile systems dependent on perfect execution. The myth of invulnerability faded. Submariners were no longer just warriors. They were custodians of machines that tolerated no error. Scorpion reminded the world that even the most advanced weapons carried human vulnerability within them. The Cold War ended without a nuclear exchange, and deterrence is often credited for that outcome. But deterrence came at a cost rarely acknowledged. Submarines like Scorpion operated continuously in hostile environments, absorbing risks so the balance of power could hold. Their losses were not part of victory parades or peace treaties. They were buried in silence. For surviving family members, closure remains elusive. Some continue to seek answers. Others have chosen acceptance over certainty. Time has softened some edges, but not erased doubt. The ocean keeps its secrets well, and the institutions that sent Scorpion to sea have moved on. Grief, however, does not operate on strategic timelines. Historians still debate what truly happened in May 1968. Was it a mechanical failure waiting to happen? A torpedo malfunction? A silent encounter between rivals who never admitted it? Each theory says as much about the Cold War as it does about the submarine itself. In a world built on secrecy, even truth becomes classified. USS Scorpion stands as a reminder that the Cold War was not bloodless, even in peacetime. It claimed lives quietly, far from cameras and headlines. The men aboard did not die in battle, yet they paid the ultimate price for preparedness. Their sacrifice was real, even if the circumstances remain obscured. The submarine rests still, its hull broken, but its story intact. Time has not erased its significance. If anything, distance has sharpened its meaning. Scorpion represents the limits of control in a technological age and the cost of operating beyond them. It is a monument not of stone, but of silence. In the end, USS Scorpion may never be fully explained. The ocean, like history, does not yield all its answers. But the crew's legacy endures, not in theories or speculation, but in remembrance. 129 men went to sea and never returned. Their story is not defined by mystery alone, but by service, sacrifice, and a Cold War fought where the world could not see.